Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the sandals of a samurai, but not the grim, armor-clad figure you picture striding across a battlefield. No, tonight you're tagging along on something far rarer, a day off. You stand in the dust of the practice yard, wooden sword in hand, the sun just low enough to paint the horizon in gold. Your shoulders ache from drills. Your hair smells faintly of sweat and pine smoke, and you suddenly realize you've wandered into the samurai version of free time. And trust me, you probably won't survive this routine. Not because of enemy arrows, but because you'll pull a muscle before lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love imagining someone in New York nodding off at midnight, while another in Tokyo is just stirring tea at dawn. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grip the bamboo shurnai with both hands, feet planted, knees slightly bent, ready for the mock duel. The opponent across from you, another off-duty warrior, grins like a kid sneaking candy. The crack of wood meeting wood rings out, startling a crow from the fence post. On the training ground, the seriousness of combat fades into something almost playful. Instead of trying to kill each other, you're sparring for bragging rights and maybe a wager of rice wine later. The truth is, the samurai rarely left their swords behind. Even on days off, they carry the katana at their hip as if it were an extra limb. But here, in the relative safety of the yard, you get to swing the bamboo substitute without worrying about bleeding on the dirt. Historians still argue whether these sparring sessions were truly days off or just cleverly disguised training routines. After all, can a warrior ever completely clock out? You step forward, strike down, and your friend parries easily, laughter escaping as the shurnai smacks your knuckles. Not exactly a lethal wound, but painful enough that you shake your hand with exaggerated drama. The group nearby bursts into chuckles. Someone calls out, "He fights like a farmer chasing chickens." The joke lands because half the men actually came from farm families, and, well, chickens were notoriously hard to catch. The ground beneath your bare feet is packed with dust, and every swing stirs up little clouds. You catch the smell of sweat, cedar oil rubbed into the bamboo, and the faint tang of soy from the cook fire at the barracks. Someone sneaking snacks early, which makes your stomach growl louder than your war cry. Now, the mainstream fact, samurai didn't just practice swordplay. They also trained in archery, horseback riding, and even swimming in armor. That last one sounds like a cruel joke, but it was real. Imagine dragging iron plates through a river. You would sink faster than your Wi-Fi during a storm. Yet they practiced it because rivers in Japan were everywhere and battlefields didn't conveniently end at the shoreline. But here comes the quirky tidbit. Between bouts, some samurai actually entertained themselves with martial games that looked suspiciously like children's play. One involved leaping sideways to dodge a partner's strike while shouting silly rhymes. Another resembled a primitive version of dodgeball, except the ball was sometimes a small sack filled with pebbles. Get hit in the shin with that, and you'd remember it longer than your vows of loyalty. The sun slips lower, shadows stretching like long black spears across the ground. You pause, catching your breath, watching as two younger samurai throw themselves into a full-speed match. Their strikes echo in the air, fast and sharp, until one missteps, trips over his own hakama trousers, and face plants in the dirt. For a second, everyone holds their breath. Then he lifts his head, nose coated in dust, and mumbles, "I meant to do that." The yard explodes in laughter, louder than any war cry. That's the thing about days off. Discipline bends just enough to let humor creep in. You stretch your arms, feeling muscles loosen, and watch as an older samurai takes a seat under the wooden awning. He doesn't spar anymore, but his eyes twinkle as he comments on everyone's form. Terrible. Worse than terrible. That swing wouldn't cut tofu. You realize these critiques are half teaching, half comedy routine. A breeze drifts in, carrying the scent of blooming plum trees from beyond the training walls. For a moment, the world softens. You're not standing guard, not marching to war, just moving through motions with friends. You test the weight of the shurnai again, remembering how heavy the real steel blade feels compared to this light stick. You wonder how many generations have stood exactly here, trying to balance leisure with the ever-looming duty of a warrior's life. There's still a debate among historians about whether samurai had anything close to play as we imagine it, or whether every game was just another shade of preparation for violence. Some records suggest they laughed, joked, and enjoyed themselves freely. Others paint them as grim figures who never set down their armor. The truth, you suspect, is somewhere in between, just as your sparring match is both fun and deadly serious at the same time. Your opponent bows, then lunges in with a final strike. You block, stumble back, and land squarely on your rear in the dirt. The onlookers howl. You bow theatrically from the ground, brushing dust off your hakama, and mutter, "At least I fell with honor." The laughter rolls on like a tide. Evening creeps closer. Someone strikes a drum, signaling the end of the training games. You set aside the bamboo sword, flex your sore hands, and feel the quiet satisfaction of exhaustion that's not born from war, but from play. You stand there, heart slowing, surrounded by warriors who, just for a moment, feel more like neighbors than soldiers. The golden light fades, and the yard dissolves into the shadows of night. You brush the dirt off your hakama, sling the bamboo, sword onto a rack, and step through the wooden gate. The clang of sparring fades behind you, replaced by the softer hum of evening. The air is cooler now, tinged with the smoky sweetness of pine torches being lit along the narrow streets. Your feet carry you toward a place where battle scars mean little and the armor on your shoulders doesn't weigh you down. The tea house. A low paper lantern sways in the breeze, its orange glow trembling across the dusty road. You duck your head to pass under the Norrin curtain, and the world outside instantly feels distant. The air is thick with the grassy steam of steeped suncha, mixed with faint ink from brushes drying in the corner. Tatama mats soften your steps. Voices murmur. Laughter trickles like watered-down stones, and the clack of shamizan's strings adds rhythm to the night. You slide down across from a fellow warrior who already has a cup in hand. He smirks and says, "Finally done pretending to be a crane in the yard." You roll your eyes, remembering your earlier tumble. The table between you is low, lacquer polished by countless elbows, and the serving girl sets down a steaming bowl before you. The first sip hits bitter, grassy, hot enough to fog your vision, and yet it soothes every tired muscle in your shoulders. Now here's the mainstream fact slipping quietly into your tea. Samurai weren't just warriors. They were expected to master the arts of poetry and calligraphy, both to sharpen their minds and to prove they were cultured beings, not simple brutes with swords. That's why tea houses became informal schools of verse and brushwork, with reputations rising or falling on the cleverness of a single haiku. Your friend leans forward, his grin mischievous, and produces a folded sheet. He's written a waka, 5 lines balanced between elegance and cheekiness, about a rooster that won't stop crowing outside his barracks. He clears his throat dramatically, then recites. The rooster shouts dawn, / yet my dreams still cling like smoke, / sword hand heavy now, / I pray the bird meets silence, / cooked with rice before sunrise. The table erupts in muffled laughter. Historians still argue whether these poetry sessions were simply a way to pass the time or whether they carried deeper social stakes. Was a samurai judged more by his blade or by his pen? Some records suggest reputations were made and broken on the clever turn of a verse. Imagine spending years perfecting your sword stroke, only to lose standing in your lord's eyes because you botched the metaphor about autumn leaves. You stretch out your legs, toes brushing the tatama fibers, and listen as another samurai begins a quiet ballad accompanied by the shamisen. The notes rise like drifting smoke, melancholy and proud, filling the tea house until you feel the air itself vibrating. The girl pouring tea hums along, though off-key, and nobody minds. In this space, perfection isn't the goal, connection is. Here's a quirky tidbit worth savoring with your tea. Some samurai gatherings actually included a sort of poetry drinking game. A verse would be started, and whoever failed to complete it properly had to down an extra cup of sake. Needless to say, by the end of the evening, the metaphors got stranger and stranger. A dignified line about moonlight could suddenly end with something about pickled radishes dancing in the river. You imagine the hung-over groans the next morning as warriors stagger back to drills, swearing never to rhyme vegetables again. The paper walls creak slightly in the wind, and you glance out at the night. A festival must be stirring nearby. The faint pop of firecrackers, children shouting, bells jingling from stalls. But in here, the world narrows to candlelight and the scratch of brushes. One man sits hunched over a scroll, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth as he copies a Chinese poem in elegant strokes. His concentration is so intense that when someone sneezes, he jerks and leaves an inky blot. He sighs, then cleverly turns it into a painted crow. Improvisation at its finest. You lean back, letting the warmth of tea sink into your bones, and realize that even in leisure, the samurai are competing, not with blades, but with wit, style, and presence. You jot a simple haiku on a scrap of paper. Steam on the night air, / warriors forget their helmets, / cups clink like swords drawn. You read it aloud, cheeks flushing, expecting ridicule. Instead, your companions nod appreciatively. One even mutters, "That's worth another pour." The serving girl refills your cup, her sleeves brushing the mat, and you catch the subtle perfume of plum blossoms tied at her sash. It reminds you of spring nights outside the city walls, with the trees flowered pink against the dark sky. For a moment, you forget entirely about drills and duty. You're simply a guest in a pocket of warmth carved out from the cold demands of life. Someone suggests composing a group poem, each person adding a line. The verses twist from noble imagery to ridiculous confessions. One man writes about cherry blossoms falling. The next responds with a line about his sandals breaking at the worst moment, and another caps it with an ode to the miraculous endurance of rice balls. Laughter spreads until your sides ache more than they did in the sparring yard. The night stretches on, cups emptying and filling again, ink pooling in little saucers, verses scattered across the tatami like fallen leaves. You realize the clatter of swords has been replaced by softer sounds. The scratch of brushes, the clink of porcelain, the hum of voices blending with shamisen strings. Leisure here is less about idleness and more about reshaping discipline into gentler forms. Your sword hand rests, but your mind dances. When you finally stand, legs tingling from sitting too long, the lantern outside flickers low. The tea house behind you murmurs with fading laughter, verses still drifting in the air. You tighten your sash, step into the cool night, and wonder which memory will last longer. The sting of wooden swords or the warmth of shared poems under candlelight. The night air greets you with a cool hush as you step out of the tea house. The chatter of voices fades into the background, and the streets open toward the soft silhouettes of temple gardens. You feel drawn that way, your sandal soles whispering over gravel paths, your chest easing with every step further from the laughter and sake. Ahead, tall gates frame the entrance, their beams creaking faintly as if even the wood has grown contemplative with age. You slip beneath the torii, and instantly the air changes. The smell of pine needles and damp moss replaces the smoke and tea. Lanterns glow faintly, their paper skins fluttering, guiding you along the winding path. You hear water trickling, gentle, rhythmic like the world's slowest heartbeat, and then catch sight of a koi pond. Fat golden fish turn in lazy circles, scales flashing like coins at the bottom of a treasure chest. You crouch near the edge, knees cracking, and whisper, "You're richer than I'll ever be." The fish ignore you, proving their superiority. Now, the mainstream fact. Samurai frequently visited Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines, not only to pray, but also to find calm away from the noise of politics and duty. Gardens, designed with care, were considered microcosms of the universe. Carefully raked gravel representing rivers, mossy stones standing in for mountains. You trace your toe along the gravel, admiring the neat waves, and wonder if the monk who raked them earlier curses visitors like you for ruining his perfect lines. The path carries you past a stone lantern, its surface rough with lichen. A monk shuffles by in straw sandals, head bowed, broom in hand. He glances at your swords, then at your dusty knees from sparring earlier. His eyes say, "So much fuss for men who can't even stay upright." You bow respectfully, though part of you wants to explain that the fall was intentional. Historians still argue whether these temple visits were genuine spiritual practices or just fashionable escapes from military life. Some samurai, especially under Zen influence, adopted meditation and calligraphy with sincere devotion. Others likely treated it like you treat a yoga class. Good for the body, occasionally enlightening, but mostly an excuse to nap in peace. You follow the path deeper, where lanterns give way to moonlight. Bamboo stalks rise tall, their leaves rattling softly in the night breeze. The sound is like 1,000 whispers you can't quite catch, and you feel your own heartbeat syncing with their rhythm. You pause, pressing a hand to the smooth wood of a railing, and imagine countless warriors before you walking these same stones, wrestling with the same quiet questions. What is honor when no one is watching? What does loyalty mean if the world itself crumbles? Heavy stuff for a day off, but then again, your mind has never been good at taking a break. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some samurai actually practiced a form of meditative gardening in which they clipped shrubs into shapes resembling mythical creatures, dragons, cranes, even turtles. Imagine a hardened warrior squatting with tiny shears, muttering, "No, no, the dragon's tail looks too stubby." One record mentions a daimyo so obsessed with topiary that his retainers joked his greatest battle was against uneven hedges. You glance at a bush nearby and swear it looks suspiciously like a lopsided fox. The temple bell tolls in the distance, low, resonant, vibrating through your ribs. The sound seems to wash the world clean for a moment, like an invisible tide sweeping the dust off your mind. You breathe in deeply, the smell of damp stone and cedar would filling your nose, and exhale slower than usual. You're not meditating, not really, but the garden tricks you into feeling as if you are. You step onto a wooden bridge arching over another pond. The reflection of the moon shivers in the water as koi disturb its surface. For fun, you drop a pebble in and watch the ripples spread. The fish scatter, then circle back as if saying, "Do it again, we dare you." You resist, partly out of respect, partly because your aim is terrible. At the far edge of the garden, a pavilion waits. Paper walls glow faintly with candlelight. Inside, a pair of monks sit cross-legged, their voices low, reciting sutras. You pause outside, not intruding but listening. The syllables rise and fall, hypnotic in their repetition, until you feel your eyelids growing heavier. The cadence is almost like waves rocking you to sleep. You chuckle softly at the thought. What if monasteries have been the first ASMR channels, with monks unintentionally lulling people into naps? The gravel crunches beneath your steps as you continue. Somewhere, a nightingale sings, piercing and sweet. The melody blends with the lingering echo of chants, the rustle of bamboo, and the bell's hum still hanging in the air. The garden feels like a perfectly tuned orchestra, each sound deliberate, each silence intentional. You sit on a stone bench, lean back, and let it all wash over you. Your hand brushes against the smooth surface of the bench, worn down by centuries of visitors. You think about how many swords have clinked against it, how many weary warriors have sat exactly where you're sitting now, pretending for a few hours that the world is nothing more than gravel, moss, fish, and moonlight. Maybe that's the secret of these gardens. Not escape, but a reminder that the universe is bigger than your worries, yet small enough to fit neatly inside a pond. A monk passes again, this time carrying a tray of candles. He stops, sets one on the bench beside you, and nods without a word. The flame dances in the breeze, casting your shadow long and wavering across the gravel. You watch it for a while, mesmerized by how a tiny flicker can push back so much darkness. It feels like a metaphor, though you're too relaxed to chase it down. The night deepens. Clouds drift across the moon, dimming the pond to black. The fish vanish beneath the surface. You rise slowly, stretch your stiff knees, and bow once more toward the temple. The path leads you back toward the gate, back to the wider world, but you carry the quiet with you like a hidden talisman. The dust of sparring still clings to your clothes. The taste of tea lingers on your tongue. But now there's something else as well. The calm pulse of moss, stone, and water. You leave the garden's calm behind, stepping back into the night where the air sharpens with the smell of pine smoke and damp grass. The gravel road bends toward open fields, and there you hear it, the unmistakable shriek of a falcon. It cuts across the sky, high and fierce, pulling your gaze upward. A bird circles above, its wings stretched wide, gliding like a blade through the clouds. Beside you, a pair of warriors stand with leather gauntlets strapped to their arms, whistling sharply and holding out bits of meat. Their birds dive in tight spirals, landing with the grace of arrows loosed from invisible bows. You wander closer, your sandals brushing the grass. One of the men grins, gestures for you to join. A heavy glove is offered, stiff with oil, and you slip it on, feeling clumsy as a child trying on a parent's shoes. The leather smells faintly of blood and iron. You raise your arm, uncertain. For a heartbeat, the sky is empty. Then, whoosh, the falcon drops like a stone, wings folding tight, only to flare wide at the last second, talons digging into the glove. The weight slams down on your arm, far heavier than you expected. Your knees buckle just enough to make the group chuckle. Mainstream fact: falconry was a popular pastime among samurai and nobility during the Edo period, both as a form of hunting and a display of status. The birds weren't just pets. They were living emblems of skill, patience, and prestige. A daimyo flaunting a prized hawk might as well have been flashing a luxury car. You glance at the bird perched on your arm now, its yellow eyes unblinking, head twitching as though silently judging you. And you swear its judgment is harsh. The falconer beside you clicks his tongue, holding up a strip of meat. With frightening precision, the bird lifts, swoops, and snatches it midair. The crowd oohs softly, as if they've witnessed a firework. You smile, though you're secretly glad your fingers weren't mistaken for dinner. Here's a quirky tidbit. Records suggest some falcons were pampered to absurd degrees, with specialized diets including finely cut fish or even bits of fruit soaked in sake. One daimyo supposedly commissioned a craftsman to build a miniature pavilion so his prized hawk could enjoy shade and style. Imagine a bird lounging like royalty while retainers scurry around with tiny fans. Meanwhile, your bird now tilts its head, fixing you with what looks suspiciously like disdain. You resist the urge to apologize. Historians still argue whether falconry was primarily about hunting efficiency or just pageantry. Yes, hawks caught rabbits and pheasants, but hunting parties often featured dozens of retainers marching in elaborate formation, more like a parade than a practical outing. Were they feeding their kitchens or feeding their egos? You watch the next flight unfold and suspect the latter. After all, you could catch dinner with a net in half the time. The falcon launches again, feathers slicing the air. You track it as it climbs higher, then suddenly plummets, slamming into a rabbit that hadn't realized its evening stroll would end so abruptly. Gasps ripple through the onlookers. The falconer retrieves the prey, rewarding the bird with another bite. You swallow hard, reminded that under all the ceremony, this is still a predator at work. You switch the bird to your other arm, which proves even more awkward, and nearly topple when it flaps its wings. The onlookers roar with laughter, one calling, "Careful! If it carries you off, we'll tell your lord you died honorably." You chuckle through clenched teeth, arm muscles burning, silently pleading with the falcon to be merciful. After some time, the glove is removed and the bird tied gently to a perch, its feathers preened by careful hands. You flex your sore fingers, blood rushing back, and shake your arm as if you've just survived a wrestling match. The falconer pats your shoulder with sympathy, though his smirk betrays him. Beyond the field, the evening deepens. Torches burn brighter, casting long shadows, and the distant chatter of markets drifts in faintly. You feel the phantom weight of the bird still pressing into your wrist, a reminder of both the thrill and the strain. Another group prepares their hawks, each bird hooded with small leather caps that make them look like medieval assassins waiting for orders. One samurai pulls off the hood with a flourish, and the hawk blinks awake, ruffling its feathers as though insulted by the indignity of being dressed at all. You grin, imagining the birds gossiping among themselves. My hood had embroidery. What's yours made of? The demonstration winds down, and you linger at the edge of the field. The falcons perch silently now, eyes half closed, the chaos of hunting replaced by statuesque stillness. The men exchange sake cups, congratulating each other's birds more than themselves. You realize it's not really about the rabbit or the chase. It's about the spectacle, the camaraderie, the ritual of pretending that the wild can be tamed, even if only for a heartbeat. Your arm still tingles from the falcon's grip as you turn back toward the road. The sound of feathers cutting through air follows you in memory, sharp and thrilling. It's not the clash of bamboo swords or the hush of temple gardens. It's something else entirely. A reminder that even on days off, the samurai's world was never far from claws, talons, and the patient weight of discipline. Your arm is still buzzing from the phantom grip of falcon talons when another sound reaches you. A dull thud that repeats, steady as a heartbeat. Then comes the cheer of a crowd, the stomp of feet against packed earth, and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting through the air. You follow it instinctively, curiosity tugging at your sandals, until the road opens into a broad clearing lined with banners. A sumo ring rises in the middle, a perfect circle of sand bounded by straw bales, torches flickering at its edge like fiery guardians. The crowd shifts to make space for you. Merchants, children, and fellow warriors jostle for the best view, cups of sake sloshing in their hands. The atmosphere feels alive, like lightning bottled up and waiting to burst. In the center of the ring, two wrestlers crouch, their bodies glistening with sweat, thighs as thick as tree trunks. The referee, a wiry man in ornate robes, lifts a fan, then snaps it down. The wrestlers collide like boulders rolling downhill. Sand sprays outward, catching in your hair, but you hardly notice. Every muscle in their bodies strains as they push, slap, and grapple, the earth beneath them trembling. The crowd roars, the energy pulsing in your chest. Mainstream fact: sumo wrestling was not just entertainment. It had deep ties to Shinto ritual. The dohyo, or ring, was sacred space, purified with salt before each match. Wrestlers themselves were treated almost like priests, channeling strength on behalf of the community. You watch now as a wrestler pauses between bouts, scooping a handful of salt and tossing it high. It glitters briefly in the torchlight before disappearing into the night. Of course, not every detail was solemn. Here's a quirky tidbit. Rice cakes were often handed out as prizes, and stories suggest that spectators sometimes hurled food into the ring to bribe wrestlers mid-match. Imagine trying to wrestle a human mountain while a dumpling lands on your shoulder. Tonight, a boy next to you throws a chestnut that bounces harmlessly off a wrestler's thigh. The crowd laughs, though the wrestler doesn't even blink, too focused on shoving his opponent out of the ring. Historians still argue whether early sumo was primarily ritualistic or competitive sport. Some claim it started purely as an offering to the gods for bountiful harvests, while others insist it evolved quickly into a form of entertainment for nobles and commoners alike. Watching the wrestlers now, faces red with effort, veins bulging in their necks, you suspect it was both. Sacred and sweaty, divine and rowdy, all rolled into one. Another bout begins. The two men squat low, hand hovering just above the ground. The referee waves his fan again. Silence falls for a heartbeat. Then, like thunder, they slam together. One lifts the other nearly off the ground, the crowd gasping as sand scatters. The heavier man twists, planting his opponent into the dirt with a crash that rattles your bones. Victory! The winner raises his arms, and a wave of cheers surges across the field. Beside you, a group of samurai clap politely, their composure betraying only the smallest grin. But when the wrestlers bow and the crowd starts chanting, even the stiffest warriors can't resist joining in. You catch yourself grinning too, swept up in the tide of voices. The referee calls for a break, and wrestlers retreat to sip water and fan themselves. Vendors seize the moment, rushing through the crowd with trays of skewered fish, dumplings, and sake bottles. Someone presses a warm rice ball into your hand. The seaweed crackles against your fingers, the rice soft and steaming. You bite in, savoring the simple comfort, and wonder if the wrestlers eat 20 of these before each match. Judging by their size, maybe 30. The next round features younger fighters, their movements less polished but more frantic. One slips almost immediately, face planting in the sand, to the roar of laughter from the audience. Even the referee struggles not to laugh, fanning himself dramatically. You chuckle along, imagining this poor wrestler replaying his flop in his mind tonight, like a bad dream. Between matches, musicians play flutes and drums, the rhythm bouncing off the surrounding hills. The sound threads through the air, hypnotic, pulling you deeper into the moment. A torch sputters near your elbow, sparks snapping, and for a second you feel the ring's energy seep outward, like every stomp, every shout, every crash is stirring the earth itself awake. As the evening deepens, the wrestlers grow fiercer, sweat spraying with each impact, sand caking their legs. The crowd shifts between reverence and raucousness, depending on who's winning. You glance around and notice people betting quietly. Coins, trinkets, even promises scrawled on slips of paper. A man behind you mutters that if his chosen wrestler loses, he'll owe 3 nights of dishwashing at a tea house. You're tempted to place a wager yourself, but remembering your falconry near debacle, you decide against pushing your luck tonight. One last match is called. The 2 wrestlers are legends, their names murmured with awe. They squat opposite each other, eyes locked, tension thick as storm clouds. The referee raises his fan. Silence spreads across the clearing. No laughter, no chestnuts, no whispers. The fan drops. They crash together, the ground shaking under their force. Minutes stretch like hours as they grapple, neither giving an inch. You feel your pulse race, caught between admiration and exhaustion just watching them. Then, with a final surge, one twists, heaves, and topples his rival clean out of the ring. The victor raises his arms to the heavens, his chest heaving like a bellows, and the crowd explodes in cheers that ripple into the night sky. The wrestlers bow deeply. The referee salutes with his fan, and the ring is purified once more with salt. The sacred mingles with the sweat, closing the circle as perfectly as it began. You exhale, realizing your shoulders are tense, as though you've been wrestling in spirit all along. The crowd begins to disperse, lanterns bobbing as families head home and samurai drift back to their quarters. You linger a moment longer, staring at the ring now empty and quiet, the sand smooth once again. The echoes of stomps and cheers still hum in your chest. Then you step back into the night, rice ball finished, arms swinging loose, ready to see where the path leads next. The night air hangs heavy with the smell of charcoal, grilled fish, and spilled sake. You wander away from the fading sound of drums at the sumo ring and slip into narrower streets where lanterns swing low and shadows thicken. Your sandals scuff against cobblestones, and your ears catch the faint rattle of dice, the slap of cards against wood, and the occasional burst of laughter quickly shushed. You found the side of town where warriors spend their evenings not in honor, but in risk. A narrow doorway beckons, fabric curtains painted with a fading crest fluttering in the breeze. You duck inside. The room is dim, lit only by a few lanterns and the glow of smoldering charcoal in a corner brazier. The air is thick with smoke and anticipation. Around a low table sit men in half-loosened robes, their swords stacked casually nearby. An unspoken agreement that blades are not part of tonight's games. One man shakes a pair of dice in a lacquered cup, the rattle loud in the stillness. He slams the cup down, lifts it, and the crowd leans in. Numbers flash in the lantern light, and a groan rises from those who wagered poorly. A handful of coins clink as they slide across the table to the winner. You lower yourself into a corner, watching the energy buzzing in your chest. Mainstream fact: gambling was technically forbidden for samurai, yet records show it was everywhere, from back alleys to barracks. Wagers range from coins to silken robes to promises of favors. Punishments could be harsh, confiscation of property, or even dismissal, but the thrill of risk lured many regardless. Tonight, you realize you're sitting in a contradiction. Warriors sworn to discipline, indulging in chaos. Here's a quirky tidbit. Dice weren't the only tools of chance. Samurai sometimes used seashells, rice grains, or even insects in betting games. Yes, imagine staking your dignity on whether a cricket would chirp left or right. At one end of the table now, two men are indeed wagering on a beetle crawling across a board. You lean closer, amused, as the insect ambles decisively toward the sake dish, earning a triumphant whoop from one gambler and despairing sigh from the other. Historians still argue whether gambling undermined samurai discipline or reinforced their courage to face uncertainty. Some suggest it dulled their edge, distracting them from martial focus. Others claim it sharpened their tolerance for risk, a skill as vital in war as on the dice mat. Watching the faces here, tense, flushed, hopeful, you can see truth in both. The dice pass to you. The cup feels warm from other hands, smooth against your palm. You rattle it, the dice clattering like tiny bones. A hush falls. You slam the cup down, hesitate, then lift it. The numbers gleam, just enough to win a modest handful of coins. The crowd laughs, slapping your shoulders. Not enough to draw envy, but more than beginner's luck. You pocket the winnings, already hearing your future self rationalize buying dumplings with them. As the night deepens, sake flows freer. Voices rise. One man pounds the table, swearing he's been cheated. Another insists the gods favor his dice. A woman in a bright robe sweeps into the room, her laugh sharper than the clink of coins, and joins the table, immediately scooping up a pile of winnings with alarming ease. You glance at her hands, quick, practiced, maybe too smooth. But no one dares call her out. The brazier pops, ember spraying briefly. A samurai across from you leans in, whispering about stakes far greater than coins. Land, horses, even heirloom blades have been lost in places like this. You imagine walking home tomorrow empty-handed, armor pawned to cover debts, your lord shaking his head in disappointment. A chill creeps down your spine, even in the warmth of the room. Still, the allure is undeniable. Dice rattle, coins clink, sake splashes, and you feel the rhythm of it wrapping around you, tugging you deeper. For a moment, you imagine yourself giving in, chasing the rush until dawn. But then you catch sight of the swords stacked by the wall, their hilts gleaming faintly in lantern light. Discipline and danger always sit side by side. One wrong roll, and those blades might not stay idle. You rise, tucking your modest winnings into your sleeve, and slip toward the curtain. Behind you, the laughter surges, followed by a shout, then silence. You don't look back. Out in the alley, the cool night air hits you like water, rinsing away the smoke and tension. Your sandals scuff against stone again as you walk, coins heavy in your sleeve, heartbeat still quick from the brush with chance. Somewhere behind you, dice tumble, voices rise, and the wheel of fortune keeps spinning without you. But your steps are lighter, your grin sly. After all, you just outplayed destiny itself, at least for one round. Steam curls upward in pale ribbons as you step through a mountain path, the scent of sulfur hanging heavy in the crisp evening air. The night insects sing from the dark pines, and somewhere nearby a brook murmurs under stones. Your sandals slip against damp rocks as you approach a clearing where heat rises from the earth itself. There, tucked between cedar trunks, waits the secret reward for a weary samurai's day off, the hot spring. You crouch by the edge of the water, dipping your fingers into the mineral-rich pool. The surface glows faintly in lantern light, a mirror of the moon above. You strip away armor, loosen robes, and slide in. Instantly the world shrinks to warmth. Your muscles, knotted from training and gambling nights, ease as if the mountain itself were massaging them. The water laps against your chest, heavy with minerals said to heal wounds and soothe spirits. Here's your mainstream fact. Hot springs, or onsen, have been part of Japanese culture for centuries. Samurai lords maintained private baths in castles, and entire villages grew around famous springs, welcoming warriors seeking rest from campaign trails. Some springs were even designated for specific ailments. One for battle-worn joints, another for skin cut raw by armor straps. But there's a quirky tidbit too. In certain places, samurai believed the spirits of mountain foxes shared the baths, invisible tricksters eager to steal unattended garments. That's why you notice swords lined neatly on racks nearby, robes carefully folded and tucked beneath stones. Insurance against mischief, whether from foxes or opportunistic thieves. You smile, imagining yourself try to explain to your lord why you returned from a retreat with nothing but a towel. Around you, voices rise. A pair of fellow warriors splash into the water. Cheeks already pink from the rice wine they sipped before arriving. One begins singing a ballad, loud, off-key, and definitely too long. Another joins in, but forgets half the lyrics and hums nonsense until everyone's laughing. You rest your head on the stone edge, closing your eyes, the echoes blending with the rustle of trees. Historians still argue whether these retreats were truly restful or simply another stage for politics. Did lords invite retainers to hot springs for relaxation or for subtle negotiations? Was the steam hiding plots as often as it soothed wounds? Looking at the cluster of men trading sly glances and hushed words a few feet away, you suspect the answer might be both. The water heals, yes, but also loosens tongues. You slide deeper until only your nose peaks above the water, letting the heat dissolve the last tension in your spine. For a moment, you almost drift asleep, the mountain hum cradling you. But then a splash jolts you awake, a drunk companion belly flopping gracelessly, sending waves across the pool. Everyone roars with laughter, and he rises sputtering, insisting it was a demonstration of naval training. Later, after the songs fade and the steam thickens, you step out, skin flushed and glowing in the cool night. You wrap yourself in a robe and sink onto a straw mat laid nearby. Someone passes you a small cup of sake, its warmth echoing the spring's embrace. Fireflies drift lazily over the clearing, sparks against the velvet dark. The air smells of pine resin and minerals. The voices around you grow softer, stories traded in half whispers. Embarrassing defeats, forbidden romances, boasts of duels that may or may not have happened. You sip, smile, and let the stories wash over you like the water did. Here, under the stars, the weight of duty lifts just enough to feel almost human. You think of tomorrow, when swords will be buckled on again, when discipline will return like a stiff collar. But tonight, in this hidden cradle of earth and steam, you're only a body, warm and unarmored, carried by water older than empires. Morning fog clings low over the castle rooftops as you walk slowly, still loose-limbed from the hot spring's embrace. But today is not for training halls or gambling dens. Instead, you find yourself drawn into the quieter corners of a samurai's world. The brush, the inkstone, and the scroll. You settle before a wooden desk, a square of pale paper waiting. The ink smells sharp, like wet iron and pine smoke, as you grind the stick against stone. The rasping sound alone feels meditative. With each circle, the black grows deeper, reflecting lantern light. Then, dipping the brush, you lower your wrist and let the first character flow. The strokes are deliberate, but not rigid. The ink must breathe. Samurai were taught that poor handwriting reflected poor spirit. And so you focus, tongue caught between your teeth, as a single line curves into meaning. Here's a mainstream fact. Calligraphy, or shodo, was considered essential for samurai. Not just a decorative skill, but a mirror of discipline, clarity, and inner control. A general might write orders in sweeping brushstrokes. His authority felt not just in the words, but in the strength of the ink itself. Your hand trembles slightly as you finish a line, blotting the edge. You sigh, mutter something unrepeatable under your breath, and try again. Gentle sarcasm from your inner narrator. If your enemy saw this handwriting, they'd surrender out of pity rather than fear. Still, practice continues, and by the fifth sheet you see improvement, each character sharper, each stroke more confident. But not all brushwork was about orders. Some samurai poured their frustrations or joys into poetry. You glance at the margin of your paper, where you've scrawled a short verse. Moonlit water, sword set aside in silence. Steam fades with dawn. It's not award-winning, but it soothes. Quirky tidbit. Some samurai apparently competed in impromptu poetry duels, hurling verses at one another like arrows, with bystanders declaring winners. You imagine yourself standing up dramatically, brush in hand, declaiming about moonlight, only for your opponent to roast you with a haiku about spilled sake. Historians still argue whether poetry truly reflected samurai life or was more of a polite mask. Were these verses sincere windows into their hearts, or polished performances for social gatherings? Looking at your ink-stained hands, you suspect a little of both. What starts as pretense often slides into honesty when the brush won't obey your lies. You lay the finished sheet aside, but the day off stretches still. Another path opens, the tea room. You follow it, sandals whispering across tatami, until you enter a small hut where the world shrinks to simplicity. The host bows, gestures, and begins the ritual. The kettle hums, steam curling. The bamboo whisk stirs powdered green into froth, each movement choreographed with quiet purpose. The cup is warm in your palms, the taste bitter but grounding. Around you, silence reigns, broken only by water, whisk, and breath. The ceremony is not about tea at all, but about presence. One cup, one moment, never to be repeated. You sip, exhale, and for a rare instant, you feel everything align. No duels, no wagers, no fox spirits to steal your robes. Just this tea, this breath, this fleeting stillness. And so the samurai's day off drifts toward dusk, not in triumph or spectacle, but in quiet strokes of ink and the rising steam of tea. The sword waits patiently for tomorrow. Tonight, though, you are only a writer, a dreamer, and perhaps, if you're honest, a little drowsy. And now, as the lanterns dim and the ink dries, you let your shoulders sink into the futon. The day has been long, wandering from gardens to arenas, from sake halls to steaming springs, from dice tables to paper scrolls. Each scene fades slowly, as if sliding down a gentle river, the current carrying you further from the noise and nearer to rest. The voices of samurai companions, once so sharp with laughter and wagers, blur into soft murmurs. The crackle of charcoal in the sumo pit becomes the low hum of your own breath. The bubbling of the hot spring is just the slow rhythm of your heartbeat, steady and calm. Even the scrape of ink across paper lingers, but only as a whisper, reminding you of the discipline tucked beneath all those moments of play. You picture the gardens again, raked gravel glowing pale under moonlight, pine shadows stretching long and forgiving. The air is cooler now, a breeze slipping under shoji screens, brushing lightly over your skin like silk. Somewhere, a nightingale sings once, then settles into silence. Let the imagery soften. The sword is stored away, polished and patient. The dice are stacked, motionless, their rattle stilled. The teacup rests empty, its rim catching just a glint of memory before darkness folds over it. Your breathing lengthens, your body heavier, as though the mountain spring still cradles you. With each exhale, another piece of the day drifts loose, sinking into the quiet earth. You no longer need to follow the path of the warrior or the wanderer. You only need to rest deeply and safely, wrapped in the hush of history. Good night. Sleep well. Sweet dreams.